Hello, today I'd like to share with you rather a useful tip for anyone who likes to create HDR images. Please don't turn off at this point. If you don't like HDR, you might like this. It's rather an easy way in Lightroom to create an HDR image from one raw file and turn that into a rather useful black and white image. Here we are with the starting image. Took this last year on the pier at Swanage, and the lighting was rather nice, but I forgot to use a neutral density graduated filter on the sky, so the sky's a bit too light. I could correct all this in the Lightroom, but I'm going to actually turn this into an HDR image. Now, the first thing I did was I made the other corrections that I wanted, such as straightening the horizon and changing the camera calibration to be camera neutral. And now what I'm going to do is create two more versions of this image by using the virtual copy facility. So if I right click on the image now, I can create a virtual copy, and in the virtual copy I can make further adjustments that affect just this virtual copy. So I'm going to create a version now with the image at around 1.5 stops underexposed. I'm now going to click back onto my original image. I'm going to create a second virtual copy, and this time I'm going to overexpose the image. So now we've got three versions of the same image. One at the correct exposure, one underexposed by 1.5 stops, and one overexposed by 1.5 stops. So next I'm going to go back to the library, and here you can see the three images. This is the true image, here's the virtual copy that's overexposed, and here's the one that's underexposed. All I have to do now is select all three of them, right click, and then I can export to HDR Efex Pro. Now when I do this, Lightroom creates three images, one from each of these images here. So one's the original, two virtual copies, and then it opens them in HDR Efex where I can blend them. Now because these images were created from one raw file, at the moment it doesn't know what to do with them in terms of being able to work out which is underexposed, overexposed, and so on. So we need to set this manually. Normally it does this automatically by reading in the data from the raw files, but as I say, the data is identical in all of them. Okay, so there we have 1.5 stops underexposed, the correct exposure, and 1.5 overexposed. Now the other thing to watch out for is this ghosting reduction. Normally if you've got things moving in the image you can turn on ghosting reduction. In this case when you do it, because they were all created from the same image, you can see a lot of this halo effect around objects that are high contrast. So I'm going to actually turn that off. The other thing you can turn off is the alignment. You don't need it because they're all created from the same image. And the other thing we need to do is check for chromatic aberration. Now the chromatic aberration, using this function here, you can check areas of high contrast such as this edge. Now because these images were all created from one same image, it tends to highlight things like the chromatic aberration problem. So I can easily now correct that, and there we are, that's more or less corrected. It'll do for this example, and we can now create the HDR image. Now the software is now blending the image, and it's going to open it in a minute in this tone mapping interface. Okay, here's the image, and now we can start to add some of the features that we can use in HDR Efex. So I'm going to actually use the depth to strong. I'm going to set the drama to deep. I'm going to reduce slightly the tone compression because at the moment the histogram's well within the tonal range, and I'm just going to increase the method strength. Now I'm not going to really go into what all these mean in this tutorial. We'll save that for another day. The other things that I can do that are quite useful in here is I can use the levels and curves feature to add a little bit more impact to this image. I will darken down the sky with the neutral density graduated filter, and I'll just open up the foreground a little bit as well, and I'm going to add a vignette to the image, probably a lens vignette 3. We'll make that a rectangular one, and there we go. Now it's still not quite as I would like it. I'd like the image a little bit more exposure at this stage, a little bit more contrast, and we'll give it a little bit more structure. There we go. So we've actually got now a reasonable colour image. It is showing some signs of HDR, but I'm not too worried about that at this stage. So I'm going to save that, and that will now go back into my Lightroom catalogue. Great. So here's the new image in our Lightroom catalogue, and the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to edit that in Silver Efex. So Silver Efex Pro is the black and white conversion software from Nik. I'm going to edit the original image because I'm not too worried about this. I can recreate it anytime, and we'll just turn that on to edit. So this is the default settings for the image that we've just created. What I'm going to do though is change some of these settings. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to actually choose something like an orange filter here, or maybe a yellow filter. We'll go with orange, and I'm going to increase the strength of that, and I'm going to change the color responses for this image as well. So blue is going to become darker, so is cyan. Yellow I'm going to increase, and red I'm going to open up as well. The other thing I'm going to do is add a little bit more contrast through the curve, and now I'm going to go to work with some of these filter adjustments up here. One of the best filter adjustments for this type of image is the dynamic brightness, and we can reduce the dynamic brightness to make the image quite dark. Now the other thing we can use is this soft contrast filter. Now normally people use that to add in the contrast. It doesn't look very good, but if you run this to the negative, you actually open up quite a lot of the shadows, and it can become quite effective. There we go, and now we can just amplify some of the whites in the image and some of the blacks, and we'll add a little mid-tone structure, and a little bit of highlight structure. And the only other thing I really want to do now is do some corrections selectively on the bench using contrast, and again on the foreground down here adding in additional contrast like so, and a little bit of structure as well. And finally, because we've weakened the vignette we applied previously, I think I'm probably going to apply a little bit more lens fall off there, and we'll make that a little bit more rectangular. There we go, and possibly add in a border as well, and there we go, finished black and white HDR image that has quite a lot more impact than the original colour image. So we'll just take a look at that in a moment. There we go.